Hey everybody, welcome to Problem of the Week number 6. We took the cookies. All right, here we go. So when I did this problem the first time, I did it a really hard way. And when I went back and looked at kind of my procedure, I realized that there was a much quicker way to do it. So for all of you out there in the math world that want to see both, well, it's your lucky day because I'm going to show you both, but I'm going to go over the easier one, well, easier for me, solution first. So there's a few things in the question that obviously we need to know before we get started. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to give you some of the key points. So we know that at the very end, there are 10 cookies left in the jar. That is so important. All right, that is our biggest clue. Now, they also give us kind of some more clues that we can use along the way to find the solution. So we know that Harold starts everything off, and Harold is going to break the total amount, which we don't know, which is what we're trying to solve, into 3 equal piles. He keeps one pile. The other 2 piles, they go to Lucy. Then Lucy puts those piles together and splits that into 3 piles. Okay? She keeps one. She puts those together, gives those to Livio. Then Livio takes all those and splits them again into 3. He keeps a certain amount at the end, 1 left over, and more importantly, 10 left in the jar. So 10 in the jar is where we're going to start. All right, so here's what we know. We know Livio had to split, well, however many he got from Lucy into 3 equal piles. All right, and they also gave us a key piece of information that there was 1 left over. So if we have 10 in 2 piles, because remember, Livio split it into 3. If 10 is in 2 piles, then one of those must be worth 5. So I can take that number and attach it to my 3rd pile. All right, so these are the 10 left over. This is the 5 that Livio's going to take plus his 1 more cookie, and we get a total amount of 16 cookies. So Livio was given 16 cookies from Lucy. All right, now we just work backwards. All right, but there's a couple parts you need to be careful with. So if Livio was given 16, all right, that was what I totaled down here. All right, 5, 5, and 5. Here's my 10 left over. 5 plus 1 for Livio. That's what he keeps. So if Livio has 16 from Lucy, all right, we know that that 16 came from 2 piles. She keeps 1, but gives away 2. So we have to split that 16 into these 2 piles. So 16 divided by 2 is 8. So there's going to be 8 in this pile, 8 in this pile. Now we also know, because it said in the question, that all the piles were equal. So if all the piles are equal, that would also make this 8. 8, 8, and 8. Well, that is a total of 24 cookies. So Lucy was given 24 cookies from Harold. So if Lucy was given 24 cookies, well, that means those cookies, those 24, came from 2 of Harold's piles. Because again, Harold keeps 1 pile and the other 2 piles go to Lucy. So we have to split 24 equally into 2. Well, that's going to be 12 here, 12 here, and 12 here. All right, and that gives us a grand total of 36 cookies. Harold got 12, Lucy got 8, Livio got 6, 10 left over. Sounds good. Now, I hope that made sense. Again, working backwards from questions, sometimes it's a good way to do things. All right, you always go with what you know. And in this question, what I knew is that there was 10 left over, and that was a key piece of information. Now, I'm going to do my best to explain my first method of solving, And I'm going to do it a little quickly just because I've already solved the first one here, but this is just kind of a bonus. I use fractions because it's all about splitting things up. But then I got into some pretty tricky math. Well, it sounds tricky, but in reality it's not. Which would be dividing fractions. Ooh, no one likes to divide fractions. So I'm going to show you how easy it can be. And we have to make fractions relatable. So we have to understand how fractions relate to the whole. So there's a few things that we need to remember. And this is wrong. I'm looking at right now. Total's not 25. Total is 36. See, everybody makes mistakes, guys. Anyhow, so we're going to start with fractions. All right. I know Harold has some cookies. And I also know that Harold divides those cookies into 3 equal piles. So I'm going to create a fraction that reflects that. So 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. When I add those 3 up, they equal 3/3, which equals 1. And 1 is the total. So I hope that makes sense. All right. This is the same amount as this because 36 is our total. This is only a fraction reflecting that total. Okay. So I hope we're making sense so far. So then what I did from there is, well, Harold keeps this pile and I'm left with 2/3. All right. 1/3 plus 1/3 equals 2/3. So Lucy gets 2/3 of 36. This is when I got into dividing fractions. Sometimes it's hard to split fractions up, but you have to understand that all you have to do is divide a fraction using some very simple steps to get something that really seems pretty tricky. So I know I have to split 2/3 into 3 parts. So splitting a fraction into another fraction. Watch, it's not bad. 2/3 divided by 3. Or the way I like to write it, 2/3 divided by 3/1. Now remember, the only trick to dividing fractions is you have to cross multiply. So it's going to be 2 times 1. That's one of my crosses. All right. And then that becomes my numerator. So 2 times 1 equals 2. And 3 times 3, here's my second cross, equals 9. So 2/3 divided by 3 equals 2/9. So each one of these 3 piles is 2/9 of 36. 2/9, 2/9, 2/9. Hope that made sense. So again, Lucy keeps 1 pile, and the pile she keeps is 2/9 of the total. And Livio receives, well, 2/9 plus 2/9 equals 4/9. We're getting in some weird fractions, but bear with me. It's not that bad. So if Livio gets 4/9, we have to split 4/9 into 3 parts, right? Well, no. And this is where I had a big challenge the first time I did it. I don't split it into 4 parts. Or sorry, 3 parts. Because of this little guy. The one cookie left over. I don't know the fraction right now that represents 1 cookie. So I can't split this into 3 parts and take 1 cookie out. I just can't do it. So that's when I looked at, well, there's 10 left over. That's a big clue. And this is the clue that after I did all this work led me to do it the easier way the second time. So I looked at this and said, well, if there's 10 left over and Livio keeps 1 pile plus 1 cookie, well, that must mean that each pile is worth 5. Should have really done it this way from the beginning, but oh well. I'm going to apply this now to fractions. So I have now a total of 16 cookies left in total at the bottom. So if I want to get a fraction that reflects that, I have to divide this into 16 parts. So I divide 4/9 by 16. And that looks like this, 4/9 divided by 16. I'm just going to write it the way I like to write it, 16 over 1. I do my cross multiplication, I get 4 out of 144. All right, and I can reduce that number. You always got to reduce your fractions into their simplest terms. So I reduce that. 4 goes into 4 once, and 4 goes into 144 36 times. I'm left with a fraction that is 1/36. So this is what that means. That means that 16 parts that I had to divide 4/9 into, each one of them now becomes 1 out of 36, which tells me, if I apply this working backwards, that 36 is my total and 1 is one cookie. One cookie out of a total of 36. So once I solved that fraction and I got, well, 1 out of 36, I knew how much 1 was, and I can apply that right to the beginning and say that Harold begun this whole thing with 36 cookies. All right? Fractions can be tricky, but sometimes I don't know. Sometimes we just get messed up with them because they look weird and they're hard to work with, but really they're not that bad. The hardest part is taking a fraction and making it make sense with things you already know, like a total of 36, or, well, 10 cookies plus 5 plus 16. How do I relate 16 as a whole number to, say, 4/9? Those are the tricky things. So anyhow, I hope all this made sense. This was a little bit crazy over here. This was the far simpler way of doing it. But I always like working with fractions because they're tricky, and the more I do it, the better I get. Anyhow, thanks for tuning in. Nice to see you, and I'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.